So as Nate mentioned, we're talking about Room Family Manager again today. And this is part 2 of the series, talking about workflows with Room Family Manager. And today specifically, I'm going to cover how it can be used to do some medical planning and some coordination of content in your project based on a medical type project. So let's give a quick recap here of Room Family Manager. Some of you may not have been in our last presentation of part 1. I don't want you to feel like you missed out, so I'm going to go ahead and recap this real quick here. Room Family Manager lets you create or select different types of parameters that we use for our Room Family Manager to track some information. I'll talk about that a little bit more in depth in just a minute here. Lets you define room types, lets you assign room types to actually place Revit rooms, lets you create Revit families automatically in those rooms and validate those rooms in the future. And then as you swap out some of your content, some of your placeholder content for real content in the future, it lets you swap that out a bit more rapidly and a bit more efficiently. We'll talk about how that works here in a minute. So we use 2 types of parameters. We use a room type property, which is a text value. We use a validation status on the room, which tells the RFM tool, Room Family Manager tool, if the room is valid or not, if it actually passes what the scope had been set up as. These 2 properties are used by RFM in basically tracking and resetting some settings later on. The nice thing is that because they're parameters on rooms, you can also set them from schedules. You can also then recall very easily the validation status later on and actually check for that in the Revit schedule again within the Revit environment without actually having to have Room Family Manager pulled up necessarily. So you can definitely have that value set and checked in other ways. So the next area here is that you have the ability to create room types. And I'm going to talk about a very specific workflow today for use in the medical world. I have a few room types. I don't have all of them set up yet, but I have a few of them configured, and we'll kind of go through a sample project here and take a look at how they can be applied. So I'm going to create a list of every type of room. I'm going to have that automatically associated in Excel using a lookup and using a drop-down list. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a series of lists of content that's going to be placed within that room, quantities and sizes. And if I knew what the final family was going to be, I could actually specify that. I could specify the final family if I knew what the family name and type name happened to be. In today's example, I'm going to just be using generic placeholder content and just kind of letting, for example, like a designer go in there and fill out some basic information. In our next example, next week, we'll talk about how you can actually use actual family names in that example for original placement in the first place. But for today's example, simple placeholder content is what we're going to use. After you've created room types and actually generated which content you want, and as a matter of fact, you can technically create a single entry in a room type, and you can assign those room types while you're further developing what content needs to be in those rooms. But for now, I'm going to develop my room first, and then I'm going to go through and I'm going to assign a room type. And what this lets you do is easily see a list of all of your rooms, all of the room types that exist in the Room Family Manager tool, and you can then assign those to a single room at a time or multiple selections of rooms. And also I can sort my rooms by, say, department or room name or room number in a number of different ways. I can sort them, and I can very easily select the rooms I need and assign the proper room type to them. So we'll see that example today as I'm going through different portions of this medical floor plan and assigning room types. Another fantastic feature here is the ability to swap family. So after you've gone through, and I'm going to use a small example for this today, but after you've gone through the process of assigning room types and getting content placed and possibly doing some preliminary layout, you can also go back through, since the designer might not have originally known what the full family and type name was, they put placeholder pieces in there with some generic sizes. Well, once this model develops, you can go through and actually further refine that and set which family specifically is supposed to be used per room type. Makes it really easy for project-wide replacement of specific types of families. We'll see an example of that in a moment here. So let's jump into the demonstration. I'm going to use a new model today that was relatively, well, recently created. And we're going to take a look at how this particular model, with a number of rooms and some departmental layouts and a portion of the plan, not all of it's been fully developed yet, but a lot of it has kind of been vetted here for level 1. I have a few different primary departments in the mix here. I've got some administration, so I'm going to have some office spaces. I've got some common space out there in sort of that mint green, a lot of the corridors. and a couple just, you know, simple departments or portions of a medical or hospital type project. I'm going to focus a little bit on, say, some of the general outpatient type care and possibly some of the pediatrics care today. And we'll kind of place some objects in those rooms. So my outpatient care is down here in this area, and my pediatrics care is up in this upper left-hand corner up here, and we'll kind of focus on those two areas. But first, let's go ahead and build this up. And I'm going to show you from scratch how I put this table together, and then I'm going to open up one that I've kind of pre-assembled. So in the Room Family Manager tool, the very first time you open it up, the first step you're going to have is to choose which room type and which validation status parameter you want to be using. Now, what I did is I added these parameters. You can choose Add Parameter here. What it'll do is pull up a little dialog box and let you define the parameter for the room called RFM room type. If you already have a parameter that you want to use that's a text type of parameter, you can certainly drop this list down and choose a room type from the list that you might want to use. Maybe it's the department, probably not though. Maybe it's room use or something else that might actually you know, help define what type of room this is going to be. But this is going to be an identifier that we're going to be using inside of the next tab here when we're building up room types and assigning content to them. So choose this one carefully. You might want to actually create a brand new parameter. In this case, I have RFM room type. And then I also have a validation status here. Probably you won't have a parameter for that, so you're probably going to want to add the RFM validation status. Now, once you've done that, you've gone through the step of either adding the parameters or choosing the parameters that you want to use. You have to make sure you save the project. Now, if you're in a work sharing enabled project, this is a local save. So it's going to save your local copy. It's not going to synchronize to central. You'll have to do a sync to central later on if you want to actually publish these changes in the future. For right now, I'm going to go ahead and click Save Project. Now, also, as you first go through this tool, now, by the way, one question just popped in, and I want to be very clear about this. The question was, are you able to use spaces instead of rooms? And the answer is no. At this point, it is only rooms. This is not designed for spaces. That's more of an MEP type environment. This is designed for the architect more to do planning of say, you know, major equipment inside of a medical environment. So not necessarily for MEP yet, though. If it's something that you, you know, if you follow today's presentation, you're like, man, I could really use this in MEP, leave me some comments at the end and the feedback, and I'd love to kind of sit down and talk with you about how you might be able to use this in the world of MEP. I will explain a couple of limitations here as we go through, because you might notice some things here as I'm talking about this that might cause you a little bit of a hindrance there. But let's talk about it more if you're interested in kind of continuing that conversation. But for now, what I'm going to do is kind of work with these rooms. So when you first start up, when you first kick into Room Family Manager, you'll have just a blank spreadsheet like this. And we give you a spreadsheet. It says room type, family, you know, family and type, quantity, length, width, height. Down here at the bottom, it just has sheet 1. Now, what I'm going to do, because most of the time I'm probably not going to be doing most of this work directly inside of Revit. Usually I'm going to give this off to a designer and let them work on it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this spreadsheet out. I'm going to save it out as let's see, I'll just call this RFM templates. And this happens to be in my Revit Express Tools Workflows Room Family Manager folder here. I've got a couple of other ones. In fact, I'm going to be opening up this medical sample XLSX file here in just a moment. But for now, I'm going to save out this template first, and then I'm going to let users in the company be able to leverage this RFM template. You know, any designer who's going out talking with clients can leverage this moving forward. Now, I'm going to set up something special inside of there so I can use this a bit more efficiently while I'm in Excel. So I'm going to go ahead and open up that Excel spreadsheet here. Give me a moment as I pull this onto screen. So I have this Room Family Manager folder out here. Here's my RFM template saved as of today, the 16th at 12:10. I'm going to open this up in Excel, and I'm going to resave it as an XLSX because there's some features and functionality that I want that the XLS file may not give to me. So first of all, what I'm going to do is right-click down here at the bottom, and I'm going to rename this sheet, and I'm going to call this Rooms and Families. So I'm just going to give it a little name. This is my Rooms and Families. Specifically, this is what Revit Family Manager is going to want to be working with. It doesn't really matter what the name of this tab is. It's irrelevant. The most important thing is the headers that are at the top here and the fact that this is a tab that RFM created for us in the first place. I'm going to add another tab here. I'm going to rename this one and call this one Room Types. Okay, the reason why I'm doing room types here is so I can create for myself a list of different types of rooms. Ultimately, I'm going to go over here in my rooms and families list, and I'm going to make this cell, this A column right here, all the way down for a ways, look up all of my room types that get entered over here in my A column. Now, I have no idea how many room types are necessarily going to get entered. Maybe eventually this list gets pretty long and is pre-developed, and maybe over time, I've already got some room types in here with some typical content that I would use on a regular basis that my designers can use. For right now, starting out from scratch to begin this workflow, to begin this process, the first thing I'm going to do is create for myself a lookup that looks up the information off of here. So I'm going to use the entire A column, no header. I don't need a header. I'm just going to go in here to the rooms and families list here. I'm going to go over to my data tab and use data validation here in Excel. Now, this is not going to work in this background spreadsheet tool that we provide you. So, and that's okay, because generally speaking, most of the users are going to be using the Excel environment to actually fill this information out. So don't worry too much about that. If it's meaningful for you to have this drop-down list available here in the Room Family Manager, let us know. We'll take a look at that. But for right now, most of your work's going to happen in Excel anyway. So I'm going to go ahead and do some data validation on this. I'm going to be building a list. My source is going to equal the Room Types tab, column A. Now, I don't know exactly how much of column A it's going to be. I could actually kind of drag this down and have it, go from A1 to, A25. But I'm just going to tell this, you know what? Go ahead and grab all of column A. So if you just take out the cell references, the specific row references, and just put in AA, what it'll do is it'll automatically grab the entire column as much as is in there, which is great. I'm going to go ahead and click OK here. This is going to automatically grab that. I'm going to drag this list down. By the way, I notice I'm having a little bit of a connectivity issue here. That's okay. It's going to pick back up here in about probably 30 seconds, and you'll be able to see my screen again if it's currently paused for you. So give it just a moment here. I'm going to watch that. Yeah, it's almost back up. Just waiting for my internet connection to come back. Sorry, guys. My internet just dropped out on me in the middle of the presentation again today. Work on getting that fixed. All right, so don't let up. So what I'm going to do while I'm waiting for this to come back is I'm just going to simply drag this A column down here on my Room Families tab. And when I do this, what it's going to do, as I drag this down all the way, drag this down, I don't know, maybe a couple thousand rows. I don't know how many I'm going to need. I'm going to drag it for my purposes right now down just to about the 1,000 mark. So we'll go down to right there. Oop, a little beyond that. We'll go to 1,001. Why not? There we go. So there's 1,001. So every single one of these rows now has a link to this Room Types tab over here. So over here, Room Types tab, got that set up. I haven't filled out any room types just yet, but I will be here in just a moment. So on the Room Families tab, I've got 1,000 rows worth of links back to that tab over there. So if I go over here to room types, I can start filling out different types of room names. So maybe I have like patient room. Patient room. I'm going to put this in caps and smalls. I don't want this upper in lowercase. Patient room, standard, and maybe I call out how many beds I want. Maybe I have like a 3-bed room or a 3 to 4 bed room. And so I have that as one of my rooms. So I'm just going to copy this and steal this real quick here and kind of propagate this down. Maybe I've got a 2-bed standard room that's in my building. Maybe I've got a semi-private room over here. So I've got a semi-private, and this is a 2-bed environment. And I'm going to copy this down. I've got like a 1-bed semi-private, and I'm going to have a private room that's a 1-bed as well. So we'll go in here and call this out as a private room. Okay. So I'm just setting up different types of room types here. So after I've set this up, I'm going to be using these because on my Rooms and Families tab over on the left-hand side over there, one of my goals here is, going to be to list out a room and every single piece of content in that room that I want to have automatically placed. The part of my workflow that I want to kind of work with here. So what I'm going to do is toggle over to the Room Families tab, and by using that lookup, I've now got 5 rooms that I can work with, and I can continue to leverage those names over and over in a very consistent way, so I don't have to manually type them out or accidentally fat finger something, because I'm known for doing that. I want to make sure that doesn't happen. And yeah, I'm aware that the video froze again. It'll be back here in just a moment. I think it's back right now. So I'm going to click over now to the Room Families tab. I'm going to drop down this list, and now in this list is automatically propagating from whatever's over here on my Room Types tab. So I'm going to drop down and do my first standard room right here. Now I'm going to expand this column out just a little bit as well. If I drag this down a couple, I mean, I can automatically propagate this down. That's fine. But the nice thing is that if I happen to add one in later on, I could certainly, in the middle of a mix, come back and go, yeah, I need another, standard 3 to 4 bed for some reason with another piece of content. Even if I've got a couple of, standard 2 beds in the mix here, I can at least use that part of that standard list. So that's one of the things that I recommend that you do with Room Family Manager is, build yourself a list of all the types of rooms that you're going to need first. Possibly by department, possibly, I don't know, a number of different ways you could set this up. And then in your Room Families list over here, you're going to have a number of rows per room type that's going to list out different types of content. So I'm going to have like, patient bed, patient type 1, okay? It's a type 1 bed or something. I'm going to have, in this case, 3 to 4 beds. So I'm going to put in here 4 beds. And I'm going to put in a basic size. Maybe it's like 96 inches by 52 inches by, I don't know, 36 inches. So I'm going to put in a physical size for that, right? I'm going to go through and for each piece of content that has to exist in this room, the trash can, it's the basic trash can. Maybe it's, 18 by 12 by 18. It's a really, oops, that's the quantity right there. That's not what I wanted. I want to have one trash can at 18 length by 12 wide by 18 high. Right? Just go through the process of putting in each thing. Now, if I knew what the exact family and type name was, and we're going to cover this next in session 3, how to actually enter, families and types in this list if I know what they are directly, I could certainly do that. But I probably don't. Now, I might have here for my families and types list a sheet on, another tab down here that's families and types, and I could do some interesting lookups. I could do some automatic pulling of lengths, widths, and heights for some standard families and types that I might be working with here. So there's a number of ways you can help to automate some of this for the actual designers themselves. In this case, what I'm going to do is not save this spreadsheet right here. Actually, I'll save it, I guess, right now, and I'll come back to this a little later on. Actually, I'm going to do a save as, file, save as. In my Room Family Manager folder here, I'm going to save this out as an XLSX. This is a, the 2010-2013 format. Has a little bit extra functionality. I could do some extra things with this. I'm going to go ahead and save this here, and I'm going to shut this down. Instead of me doing that and actually working through the process of filling out that form entirely, what I'm going to do instead is load another one that I've already pre-filled out. Right, to do a little Betty Crocker work here where I've already pre-filled out some of this information. So I'm going to go ahead and use my medical sample file here, open this up. And in my medical sample file, did I save over that? I hope not. Load, medical sample XLSX. Uh-oh, I might have overwritten something I didn't mean to overwrite. Medical sample XLS. It's not loading. Let me just do new and then load file that I want. There we go. There we go. It wasn't loading up properly. Now I had to just basically do a refresh here. So anyway, I've got a number of these rooms kind of pre-configured. Again, patient room standard. I got a 2-bed. I've got a semi-private with some extra content in it. And a semi-private with 1 bed. And some of these have different pieces of content, different quantities that they require for the different types of beds in the rooms. For example, this patient bed here, bed patient 3 for this 1-bed room only has 1 versus the 2-bed. It has 2 of those same beds, and I've got some basic sizes kind of out there already. All right. This is already ready to go. What I'm going to do is start assigning some room types here in my project based on the room types that have been filled out over here. Now, I do have still those 2 tabs down here at the bottom, right? This tab here doesn't mean anything, though, for my assigning of room types over here. The only thing that matters is if I have a room type that has at least 1 piece of content associated to it, with a quantity. As long as I have those three things met, even if I don't have a length, width, and height, as long as I have these three things met, I'll be able to go over here to my assigned room types and assign it to some of my rooms. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to sort my rooms by my department. I'm going to kind of go to my pediatrics area here and take some of these exam rooms here. So I've got some pediatrics exam rooms. I'm going to set those up, if I drop this list down, as one of my pediatric rooms. And I've got, 6 different room types that I've actually filled out on that previous tab. This, in this case, is going to, for all 3 of these, well, I'm going to still have 4 of these. I'm going to grab all 4 of these rooms here. I can do it one at a time. If I go over here and use the drop-down list, this is one at a time. I can say pediatric room 2 bed, right? I can do that, but it doesn't grab all the ones that I've highlighted. If I go here to the top row here, I can do assign room types, and from here, I can go through and say, oh yeah, look at that, pediatric room, standard, 1 bed or 2 bed or 3 bed or whatever the one I want to be using here. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and choose 2 bed. Now, I've also got down here in my outpatient area a couple of exam rooms. In fact, they're kind of split up just because they were added in different orders. So I've got some outpatient exam rooms down here as well. I can highlight as many of these as I'd like. And I can drop this list down. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and call these out as patient rooms, semi-private 2 bed. Okay, so I can call those out. That just assigns that room type parameter over here so it knows what type of room this happens to be. Now, once I've got that assigned, this step here is done. I can go through as many rooms in my project as I need to assign all the different room types out there. I'd have office type rooms, I'd have some stenography type rooms and some labs and some, demo rooms and things like that. Each one of those would have a room type that I'd be assigning that would have typical types of equipment that belong in those types of rooms. Now, once I have that, I can go through the next step here, and I can start assigning the actual content to those rooms. Now, I usually would probably sort this based on my room type, so I can actually see the rooms that have a room type associated to them. So I can put all my room types that have assignments at the top up here. So I can go through and do something like, hey, let's take this outpatient exam room right here. And when I take this room, I can place all my families into that room. Now, I have no idea exactly where this room is. I think it's in this lower left-hand corner right down here someplace. But what I'm going to do is take this room right here, and I'm going to place all the families I need for that room. So it's going to go ahead and load in my generic piece of content, and it's going to drop a bunch of content into this room. Actually, it's going to drop it into all of these rooms because my default option here on Place Families, if I drop this list down actually, is to place on all of my room types based on my my type definitions and family mapping. That's my default method. And it just does it for all rooms. It doesn't do it for just a specific selection. So it went through my entire project, placed all my pieces of content out there. You can actually see some little pieces of content up here in the pediatric area. You can see some pieces of content down here in the exam room area as well for the outpatients. So at this point, what I can do is shut this down, and I can start to do a little bit of organization for myself. So I've got a couple of beds in here. These aren't actually recovery rooms where I normally have 2 beds, but this actually does have 2 beds. As I mouse over this particular family, you'll see that the type name there is semi-private 2 bed. It's a bed 3, patient 3 bed. So it actually knows what the room type is and the type of the actual object itself. It's going to use it for tracking this information later. So it actually generates here a family and type, and the type name specifically is the room type it's been assigned to, and the family name that I gave it in that other list. I've got 2 beds inside of here. In this case, this is a desk that maybe I put here against the wall or something. I've got, if I move my room tag out of the way here, pull this off the side, I've got something here. This is a refrigerator. So maybe this goes, underneath a desk or, underneath a countertop, which I didn't actually put in here as well. I've got a task chair that maybe sits over next to these beds or something, kind of just, again, doing some space planning here. Here's another task chair. Put those next to the other bed. I've got a desk chair, in this case, a rolling desk chair. It's going to get put over here by the desk. What is this? The receptacle, the waste bin. Yeah, I'll put that over here by perhaps where the door might be. Maybe I rotate that, put this down by the door. There isn't actually a door in this space yet. I haven't gotten that far in my design process. I've got a sharps disposal container. Maybe this sits over here by the desk, right? So you're going through the process of just taking these individual objects and moving them around in the space. Maybe I take this and elevate it up at 3 feet so it actually sits on top of the desk, right? So I can have a phone in there. There's all these different components. You can put them wherever it makes sense for you, just kind of doing some space planning, making sure you've got enough room in the space. This, I believe, is like a TV, a television. there's a radio here. Maybe this goes on one of the, maybe there's an end table in here that's not actually placed yet, or maybe it goes on the desk over here, whatever, right? But the process is you're just going through with some block objects and kind of space planning out a specific room, getting things organized where you want them, and making sure you've got the right objects in the right space. Now, I might go through after I've laid out one of these rooms, and maybe these rooms here don't actually fit the 2 beds and some of that extra content. But if I laid out this room here and it was similar to the next room, I might just copy the content over and delete the original content that was in there. Maybe I take one of these rooms and copy it down here and rotate it 90 degrees or something. But you can go through the process of laying these out and at least getting a rough idea of what this layout looks like. Now, if I did go through the process of accidentally deleting something, like maybe I yanked the TV out of this room for whatever reason, or I failed to include it, or it gets accidentally deleted, or whatever the case may be, later on when I come back to the Room Family Manager tool, when I go back here to place and validate content, let me just go ahead and sort this by room type again. If I click Validate Rooms, it's going to rip through my project and find out if anything happens to be missing. So in this case, this one room right here, this outpatient room, failed to pass the validation check, and it's telling me here that the placeholder that was supposed to be in that room, which is that semi-private 2-bed television, that television component is missing from that room. Even though this is told to be a semi-private room, that room is spec'd to have a television in it. It's missing that, so it failed the actual validation status here. So I could go back through and I could replace my families. It would rip through my project again and place any individual one piece of content that happened to be missing. It looks in the rooms and go, oh, you've already got the 2 beds that you need, so I'm not going to place those. But that television component inside of there, that was missing, so it adds it back into the space, and now, of course, that particular room passes. So this is a wonderful tool. If you've gone through the process with the client, sitting down and figuring out all the content that you need in each individual room type and space type, lab, exam rooms, ORs, all those types of places, you can guarantee yourself later on by leveraging something like Room Family Manager that the correct content still exists. You go, well, that's great, Sean. You've gone through this room type over here, and you've given yourself some generic content, but what about when I actually want the real patient bed at some point? I don't necessarily want patient bed 3 all the time. I want to get a real piece of content. Well, that's a great question. Let's actually take a look at how that works. What I'm going to do is load some healthcare content into my project. I do have the Medical Productivity Pack, or Healthcare Productivity Pack, that we sell on my laptop today. So what I'm going to do is go find it. Let me go here and go to my work directory where I've got some of my content packs. And here's my medical or healthcare productivity pack. I've got a master copy right here. That's actually not the folder I want. Hang on a second. Let's go to the right folder. I've got these organized out right now on my laptop by different types of rooms, different typical configurations. So I've got a patient room right here. And inside here, I've got a typical bed that I might use. And, maybe I've got another piece of content here. I don't have a lot of these things in my room right now, but I do have, let's see, I've got a generic desk, which I'll grab. So I'm going to grab that guy. I've got a, let's see, I thought I had a trash receptacle in here someplace. I've got a Sharps container that's like a wall-mounted Sharps container that I'll bring in. I thought I had a waste can or a trash can. Guess I don't know where I put that. Cabinet, chair. I was going to swap that one out. Here, I got a leather, generic leather sleeper chair. I'll put that in the room in place of the other little placeholders that I had there. That's a good one to put in there. I'm just loading in a couple of generic pieces of content here that I can use to swap out in my actual room. I'm just selecting a few of them by holding down my control key on my keyboard while I'm trying to load some content in. Once I've selected everything that I want to bring in, I'm going to go ahead and load that content. Just open it up. So it's going to bring them in. In this case, they're in 2014, so it's going to upgrade them in the process here. But it's going to load them into my project. Some of them may have already existed, so I'm going to go ahead and just overwrite them if they already existed here in my project environment. Nothing's going to swap out here just yet. I'm just bringing in some pieces of content that I want to use. So it's doing that right now. Now what I'm going to do is go to my Revit Express tools here again and go to my Room Family Manager. And specifically for these rooms, and it can even do it for the rooms that I haven't necessarily laid out yet, I'm going to go to my Swap Families option up here. This can also be saved out. I can save this swap list so that in the future I may have, patient bed 3 used in multiple places, and I can actually save that and use that over and over again. In this case, what I'm going to do is drop down my list for patient bed 3, and for whenever it finds this standard 2-bed room, actually it's the semi-private room that I want here. Whenever it finds this semi-private room here with the patient bed 3, I can drop this list down and say, you're going to swap out for that patient bed long-term. And I think I have that Sharps container I can probably swap out here. If I drop this list down, I believe I have a Sharps container. Yep, I can swap that one out. I had that desk that I had loaded in there. I think I can grab a new desk here. So I'll go ahead and drop that list down. And what was that called here? It was, I don't remember what it's called. Let's see. Not seeing it. Notice one thing that's happening here, that it's loading in actually, or letting me swap out between a whole bunch of different types of families. Even if it's a component family that I can drop in, it's going to let me go ahead and swap that out. Not seeing my desk, I'm going to go ahead and, oh, there it is, desk generic, 84-inch, 24 by 30. So I'm going to go ahead and swap out for that guy right there. Oh, there's that one chair that I wanted to swap out. So I'm going to take those two task chairs that I've got, or the task chair that exists in that room, and swap that out for that chair that I loaded in here. That there we go, the sleeper typical chair. So I've created 4 different swaps right here that I want to use. And again, I could save this swap set, so I don't have to come back and keep making this later on. So I might call this out as my my medical family mappings, medical. So I can use this over and over again. So if I'm using the same room types over and over again and the same basic content, this is why I'd recommend, going into your Excel file and making some interesting lookups inside of there to help your designers be able to use the same types of rooms over and over and the same types of families with similar dimensions over and over again, so that when you're actually using this mapping inside of here, it makes it a little easier to do that over time. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and swap the room families across my project. Now, again, this is only going to be working with the semi-private 2-bed configuration here. I'm going to go ahead and swap my room families. I'm going to watch out here on screen as it does this. It should go through my project here and swap out those components. In this case, it's giving me some double counting. That's okay. And also my visibility graphics in this view obviously is turning those families off, oddly enough, because those are furniture, and this particular floor plan, this general floor plan, isn't showing furniture. I'm going to go back and turn them back on again. So they visually turned off. The actual model that we place is a generic model. And so this family swapping ability over here doesn't care what family category something is. If it's a component-based family that you can place, it'll swap it. So it just swapped out a generic model component, which is something you can't do normally in Revit, for a furniture piece of equipment. Sometimes you can't do that. It won't let you swap out certain things. And it also swapped out that face-based object there for that wall-mounted Sharps container over there. So it actually, the face-based object that it did swap out, it swapped it out for me. Even though there's no, it wasn't originally a face-based object, it'll still do that, which is kind of nice. So what I'm going to do is go to my visibility graphics here in this floor plan and quickly turn on my furniture and possibly some casework here. So furniture, turn that on. Furniture systems, look for my casework, that's already on. So I'm going to click OK and OK. And those bed objects are already placed out here. Now the orientation might not be the same. That's okay. I can go back through and re-rotate this. I may have to do some replanning of this space. Obviously, the chair that I swapped out for took up more space than the original chair that was in that room. But, I do have the ability now to kind of go through and still continue to move some things around. Obviously, my TV is still out there in the middle of the space here. Over here is my Sharps container that was a wall-mounted Sharps container. I did not get to swap out that trash receptacle, but here is that generic desk that I had placed out there, which I can, of course, move around a little bit more in this space here. Probably want to pick a smaller desk. This room doesn't look like it's large enough to handle all the equipment that I've got inside of here. Maybe my actual generic sizes weren't quite right. So for my generic content, I probably should have made them bigger, or perhaps I should have, taken a look at some other pieces of content and kind of see what their typical sizes were before I started planning around much smaller pieces of equipment there. But, that's something that you can refine over time with your Excel spreadsheet. Again, using those lookups so that designers don't have to think about this while they're sitting with the client. They can just make a choice and have it automatically look up based on that choice what physical sizes this thing is supposed to be. So I'll kind of do an example of that in the next presentation on how to go through and actually do some more complex lookups there when I do the educational facilities. How to use this for educational planning, I believe, is the next one. So there was a couple of questions that popped in while I was doing these last couple of steps here. One of them was, can there be an option for place in selected rooms? And that, I believe, is referring to this place and validate families here. If I was to click on, say, one of these, and I tell it to place families, it just does it. It places it in all the rooms no matter what. And at this point, there isn't the ability to go through and explicitly say, yeah, let's just place it in the one that's selected. It automatically places in all of the rooms if they're assigned a room type for right now. Could it be done? Sure, it absolutely could be. One thing I would strongly recommend for you to do, if you want that, is to go here to the applications menu and do a feature request and log that. Say, hey, it'd be really nice if I could place my families in a single room, and that way maybe what you could do is copy them around yourself instead of having it dump a bunch of content out there. You lay out one room, and then you copy it around after you've figured out how that one room is laid out. That could be a good thing to possibly put into the feature list of the Room Family Manager. So definitely leverage that feature request option right there. There was a question that popped up, and I think I answered this. Can the content all be different categories? And the answer is absolutely. We placed a piece of equipment here, and I thought it was generic model. I was wrong. It actually is specialty equipment here. We placed a bunch of special equipment objects that's just this RFM placeholder family. And as you saw me here swap this out, this actually swapped out for a piece of furniture. It can swap out for any component-based family that you can load or place. So yeah, you can definitely swap out content for different types of categories. That's not a problem at all. The question also popped in, will this work if you're using groups to copy and place content to similar rooms? And the answer is it absolutely or certainly should. If I take this room worth of content right here and I delete all the content out of it, and get rid of these beds right here, if I take this and I kind of, move this around a little bit and lay this out a little bit differently, maybe these beds are, I don't know, some kind of oddball configuration, thing I probably wouldn't do for an exam room here, but, I'll move some of this content around in the space. And what I'm going to do is take this collection of families right here, and I'm going to deselect that window and deselect my room tag right here. I'm going to group these. I'm going to put these into a group right now. I'm going to go ahead and say, where's my group command? There it is. Create that's an assembly. There's my group command. So create a group. And I'm going to call this patient semi-private patient's room, 2-bed, something like, I don't know, whatever. Call it by the name. So now if I take this and I copy this over into my other exam room over here, technically, because the physical individual pieces of content exist in those spaces, or in those rooms rather, they should validate out properly. So let's find out if they do. If we go here to the Room Family Manager, we go to the Place Families and Validate here. If I validate my rooms again, and I'll resort these to put these at the top, yep, all of them pass because all the content exists in all the rooms. So it doesn't matter if it's actually a group or not, it will still pass. So yeah, you can definitely lay out one of your rooms using a, whatever the place content was in that room, delete all the other content out of the other room, group the first room and copy it around. And that way it makes it easier for you to manage the actual layouts as well. If I go in there and I modify one of these rooms and change the layout, that'll update the other rooms because they're grouped. And provided it stays within the boundary of the room, it'll still pass the validation status over here. So that shouldn't be a problem. One issue you probably will have with this process is the swap family. If I pick a different family now and try and swap these out, as long as there's groups involved, it's probably going to be a bit of a problem. So what you probably want to do is choose what the new family is supposed to be so that the Room Family Manager can understand what it's supposed to be. And then in the actual group out here, also manually swap out those families yourself. And by doing that, it'll still pass validation. Because if I change the family that's supposed to be using here in Room Family Manager, but don't get it swapped out here in the actual project environment, then it won't pass because it won't think the correct families are in the correct spaces. Very picky about that, making sure the right content does actually exist in those spaces. There was another question that popped up and said, can it place the group? Well, at this point it can't. It can't place a specific group, but if you wanted to kind of, again, pose that as a wish list item, it's possible we could have, a typical group that was set up and actually specified, not parameter jammer, it's the wrong tool, Room Family Manager. Close that down. If I was over here on the build room types, maybe for family and type, one of the things I do is I put a group name over here instead of actually having, all the content. That could work. A little harder to actually validate that you have the right pieces of equipment in each of the rooms later on if it's just a group. But, it's possible that we could add that if you add that to your wish list items there. So the last question I have here is what kind of generic families does it load in? Is it wall, floor, face-based, whatever? So the generic content that we load is just a free-floating family, and it's actually a specialty equipment, as we just pointed out. It's just a cube is all it is. It's parametric. It's got a width, length, and a height. And so since this actually isn't an actual family, it's not a family and type name, it assumes this to be a type of that generically loaded family. And it knows how many of them it's going to place in that space, and it knows what actual dimensions it's going to put on this type of family. So it does that automatically for me. It is an unhosted family. I could always swap it out for a face-based piece of content, and then eventually later on choose which face in the room it's supposed to go to. But by default, it's specialty equipment, and it's generic unhosted is what we've placed. Now, you can, and we're going to talk about this in the next session, you can actually go through and specify an explicit family here. Now, if you do specify a face-based family, Revit family or Room Family Manager is not going to be incredibly happy when you do that. The reason why is because it doesn't know how to place a face-based family just yet. If you have needs for that, certainly let us know in the wish list and in the feature request, and we can take a look at that. Most of our clients have been pretty happy, though, with unhosted content as a whole. This, by the way, is why it doesn't work super good for the MEP world, because a lot of our content is face-based in MEP, whereas in the architecture world, a lot of our content is just, free-floating. Unless the door, of course, that's wall-based. But a lot of our other content is free-floating. We can move it wherever we want. Now, things like a Sharps container, maybe that would work good as a face-based object. And I can swap out for a face-based object later on. But Room Family Manager does not know how to place a face-based object. If it did try to place it, would just place it on the floor, and that would be an incorrect face anyway. So you have to rehost it anyway. So what I do is just place a Sharps generic object and then swap it out later here in the swap families, and then you can pick a host at that point in time. That way, Room Family Manager will be happy with it. So there's a question there, does the actual content need to be actually loaded within the project, or can it be pulled from a library? At this point, it actually has to be loaded in the project for it to be used by Room Family Manager. So if I'm over here in the Swap Families tab, this actually, I wouldn't want to list out every single piece of content from my directory, so this will only pull that which is in my project right now. As far as the actual room types up here, for it to actually try to place a particular family, that family does, again, have to be already loaded into my project before it's going to allow me to have it be placed. And it has to be unhosted because, again, it can't be wall-based, ceiling-based, or face-based. So it has to be unhosted content at this time. If you have wishes and desires about that, certainly, again, we strongly encourage all of you to use this request feature. If there's something about the Room Family Manager or any of our tools, for that matter, that you don't like or you want to see improvements on, we value your feedback immensely. So if you're testing this out or you see some room for improvement, please use this request feature right here. Fire us off an email by using this template right here, telling us what you'd like to see, kind of how you'd like to see the workflow work. And we would be more than happy to put that on our wish list. In fact, right now we're revisiting Room Family Manager and doing some redesign of some different aspects of it. So any feedback you have right now is a perfect time for you to give that to us so that we can get that into the next release of the next update of Room Family Manager. All right, with that, I think I've got all the questions answered here. Actually, there's one that just popped in. How does this work with unit groups, again, in a multi-family type environment? Now, we're going to be talking about how to use this in sort of an educational example next time around. It'll be very similar to this. It works pretty good with these multi-family type units, just, again, not groups yet. This doesn't leverage groups, but I could have this place, based on, like, unit 1A. If I had a typical type of, components that I wanted to be placing in there, something like, I don't know, beds and casework and countertop types and plumbing fixtures and whatever I want for that, I could certainly leverage this tool for a multi-family type environment, as long as I'm listing out what room type or unit type it's going to be and all the families and types I want to be placed within that type of space. So yeah, I can definitely do that. Again, next time around, we're going to talk about classrooms and educational type facilities, and you'll see another example of how this can be used in that type of environment. There was another request that popped up and just said, can you define room types from an existing layout in an existing project? And at this point, we don't have the ability to pull room types from a project directly. Actually, that's not true. No, we don't. We don't have the ability to pull those directly. We could extract those out, pull some of that information out using Spreadsheet Link. That's entirely possible. And pull that into a tab similar to what I'm doing down here for my room types. That's absolutely possible. It's also entirely possible to get a list of families that currently exist in there, again, using Spreadsheet Link, that, a list of the families that exist in each room. That's absolutely possible and put onto another tab. And then I could use that lookup again here from the room families tab that I've created here to look up my room types and to look up my families and types that I want to be using. So I could absolutely generate that type of list and be able to pull that into a Room Family Manager and possibly, put that in. Give us feedback on that so I don't forget about this. Give me feedback in the closing portion here when we shut down this webinar today and it pops up and says, hey, what would you like to see? Throw that in there as a workflow that you'd like to see, how I could actually extract these from an existing project. And I'll keep notes myself here as well, but if you give me that feedback, it'll get into my permanent list here, and Nate will certainly remind me to make that one of the webinars and workflows that we talk about here in our lunch hour workflows. Also, it was asking if it can read rooms from links. And the answer to that is no, it does not read rooms from links. This one only reads rooms that are live in my project, so that when I place my content, because I also can't place content into links, so the room has to be live in my active project for it to read it. Again, if that's something that you'd like to see, certainly give us feedback on that in feature requests, and let us know why and how you want to use that so we can have a good idea of why it is you want that particular feature. Not that I don't see a good reason for it, but it's not a functionality that we have just yet. So yeah, there was a comment there about rooms from links is why spaces is needed, possibly. And I can kind of see that. Those spaces is typically an MEP object again, and so right now this only does rooms. Certainly throw that feedback about why you might want reading rooms from links and or spaces into feature requests and or into the comments at the end of this presentation. We do value that, we do read it, and our dev team does base a lot of its future development on that.